Hello friends, welcome to Dungeons & Dragonfly, where I adapt various characters for use in D&D. I'm Dragonfly9078, and today I'm building Marceline, the Vampire Queen. For a bit of background, Marceline is the self-proclaimed Queen of the Vampires, though there aren't many left to take the title from her, as Marceline herself hunted them to near extinction before she was turned into one. As one of the few survivors of the Great Mushroom War, Marceline is over 1,000 years old, and generally spends her time playing her bass, going on adventures, and chilling with Finn, Jake, or her girlfriend, Princess Bubblegum. So what do we want from this build? Well, as she hunted down the vampires, Marceline absorbed many of their powers, like flight, invisibility, energy blasts, and creating undead. The power she uses most, apart from flight since she, does that near constantly, is shapeshifting, whether it's into a bat to hide, a more monstrous form to fight, or just shifting her face for a quick prank. And finally, we'll need some musical talents, and a sick bass made out of battle axe to show them off. Looking over at ability scores, I'll be using the standard point array. If you want to roll for stats, that's fine, just make sure your wisdom and charisma are high enough to multiclass. We'll start off by dumping strength. We don't need it for anything except physical attacks, and we'll get ways around needing it for those later. Then dexterity will be 12. It never really made sense to me that playing instruments uses your charisma for the performance check. I always thought you would need dexterity to play the bass. Constitution is 14, vampires tend to be tougher than the average person, and intelligence is 10. Marceline isn't dumb, but Bonnabelle is definitely the brainy one of the duo. Wisdom is 13, Marceline really grows as a person once she lets people in and tries to understand them, and we'll finish off with a 15 in charisma. In her very first episode, she is called out in the show as being a sexy vampire lady on Cartoon Network. So Marceline is a vampire, but she was originally half human, half demon, so we'll make her a tiefling Dhampir. Dhampir get +2 to one stat and +1 to another. I would say make charisma 17 and intelligence 11. We aren't actually going to use intelligence for anything, I just wanted to have a positive modifier by the end of the build, so if you want to boost something else that works better for you, that's fine. We'll choose to be medium. We have 60 feet of dark vision and a walking speed of 35 feet, along with the vampiric ability to cling to walls. We have a climbing speed equal to our walking speed, and once we hit 3rd level, we can just straight up walk across walls and ceilings. Since we're kinda sorta already dead, we don't need to breathe, and we have a vampiric bite, letting us use our fangs as a simple melee weapon that uses our constitution instead of our strength. They deal 1d4 piercing damage on a hit, and we have advantage on attack rolls with them if we're below half health. Number of times per day equal to our proficiency bonus. If we bite a creature that isn't a construct or undead, we can empower ourselves, either healing ourselves for the amount of piercing damage to the bite dealt, or adding that amount as a bonus to our next attack or ability check. Now, Dhampir replaces pretty much everything we'd have gotten from being a tiefling, but our ancestral legacy trait does allow us to keep any skill proficiencies, or climbing, swimming, or flying speeds we would get from our old race, so we'll say we were a winged tiefling, giving us a 30-foot flying speed as long as we aren't wearing heavy armor. And since we're taking Dhampir at character creation, we get 2 free skills. My picks are Performance to play our bass, though we aren't actually proficient with it yet, and Survival to fend for ourselves in the long years after we got separated from Simon. Speaking of fending for ourselves, we'll be a far traveler. Since the first time we see Marceline, she's just gotten back from a years-long adventure to far-off places. That'll give us proficiency in Insight and Perception, as well as with our bass, finally. Marceline's vampire powers come from an outside source, namely all the vampires she's killed, which makes her a warlock. That gives us Arcana and Intimidation proficiency, and I would count absorbing a bunch of vampire souls as qualifying for the Undead patron, giving us our first transformation in form of Dread. A number of times per day equal to our proficiency, we can transform with a bonus action for a minute, giving us 1d10 plus our warlock level in temporary HP, and making us immune to being frightened. Plus, once per turn when we hit with an attack, we can force the creature to make a wisdom save or be frightened of us until the end of our next turn. For an attack to do that with, we'll grab Eldritch Blast, a spell attack that deals 1d10 force damage and gets additional beams as we level up. Prestidigitation isn't an attack, but it does work for a bunch of quality of life improvements. And there's a hidden benefit specific to Marceline. Since Prestidigitation can color objects and Marceline drinks shades of red, we can use it as an infinite food source. Hex is a useful warlock spell that curses a creature who fails a wisdom save, giving them disadvantage on ability checks using the stat of our choice, and letting us deal an extra 1d6 necrotic damage whenever we hit them with an attack. It's kind of like the warlock version of Hunter's Mark. We can also take Bane from the Undead list, another curse that hits up to 3 creatures who fail charisma saves, reducing any attack rolls or ability checks they make by 1d4. Second level Warlocks get invocations like Armor of Shadows, which lets us cast Mage Armor at will, and Mask of Many Faces, which does the same with Disguise Self. That's more transformation, but this is more just the minor shifts like making our face monstrous and scary. Then we'll grab Hellish Rebuke, a spell we cast as a reaction to taking damage, forcing a dexterity save on the creature that hurt us, dealing 2d10 fire damage on a fail, half that on a success. Marceline's father is a demon after all, we can make fire. Speaking of our dad, our axe base is actually an heirloom that has been passed down through our family. We can take the Pact of the Blade to summon a melee weapon into our hand as an action. We can create a different weapon each time, or pick a specific magic weapon to serve as the Pact weapon. I would say the Ancestral Axe base qualifies, since it was an axe before we got it and we just made it into a base. And since we get second level spells, now we can also pick up Invisibility to, well, turn invisible. Building on pretty much everything from that last level, we'll use our first ASI for the Skill Expert feat. Bump Intelligence by 1, or whatever stat you raised with your 1 racial point if you didn't raise Intelligence there. Take Proficiency in Stealth, and bump Performance up to an Expertise. Even setting the base aside, Marceline is voiced by Olivia Olson, who also voices Vanessa Doofenshmirtz and played Joanna, the singer at the end of Love Actually. The girl can sing. Mage Hand is a useful bit of minor telekinesis, and we can use Darkness to unilluminate a 15-foot radius sphere with Magical Dark that even blocks dark vision. So we'll need something a little bit stronger, like Devil's Sight, an invocation that lets us see normally in both regular and magical darkness out to 120 feet. And since we're a vampire, we'll pick up Vampiric Touch. For up to a minute, we can use our action to make a melee spell attack, dealing 3d6 necrotic damage on a hit, and healing ourselves for half the damage we deal. 6th level Warlocks are Grave Touched, meaning they don't need to eat, drink, or breathe. Also, once per turn, we can change the damage type of one of our attacks to Necrotic, and if we're in our form of Dread, we can deal an additional die of damage. There aren't really any more 3rd level spells I want, so we'll pick up Suggestion from the 2nd level, to give a suggestion to a creature that they have to follow if they fail a Wisdom save, as long as it isn't actively harmful. Repelling Blast makes our Eldritch Blast push a creature that it hits 10 feet backward. That is per hit, by the way. So at max level, we can push a creature 40 feet if we hit with all 4 beams. For 4th level spells, we'll take both of our Undead specific spells. Greater Invisibility, which doesn't last nearly as long as regular invisibility, but also doesn't break if we attack or cast a spell, and Death Ward, a one-time get out of death free card. The spell lasts for 8 hours, and the first time the warded creature would drop to 0 HP, they drop to 1 instead. It also negates the first effect that would instantly kill the warded creature. We'll also pick up the Tough feat for an extra 2 HP per level, and 2 HP for every level that we get going forward. Lance of Lethargy works well with Repelling Blast, reducing a creature's movement speed by 10 feet when we hit them with Eldritch Blast. That does only trigger once per turn though, so no piling on the beams to make them unable to move, it's not quite that busted. And we'll take Contact Other Plane to make interdimensional phone calls. We contact an extra-dimensional being, and can ask up to 5 questions if we pass a DC 15 Intelligence save. If we fail, we take 6d6 psychic damage and go insane until we take a long rest. I would say we could use this to call our dad in the Nidosphere, but to be perfectly honest, he's kind of a dick, so maybe call Prismo instead, he seems like a cool dude. 10th level Undead Warlocks are even harder to kill thanks to Mortal Husk. We get resistance to necrotic damage, which bumps up to an immunity if we're in our form of Dread, and if we drop to 0 HP, we can go to 1 instead as a reaction. When we do, we can deal 2d10 plus our Warlock level in necrotic damage to any number of creatures within 30 feet. We get a level of exhaustion afterward, and we can't use the reaction again until we take 1d4 long rests. We'll also grab Create Bonfire for a bit more pyrokinesis, making a 5-foot cube of fire that deals up to 4d8 fire damage to a creature who passes through it and fails a dexterity save. 11th level Warlocks pick a Mystic Arcanum, a 6th level spell that we can cast once per day without using a spell slot. My pick here is another transformation, Tasha's Otherworldly Guise. We get either immunity to fire and poison damage and the poison condition, or to radiant and necrotic damage and the charmed condition. Our flying speed goes up to 40 feet, we get plus 2 AC, our weapon attacks count as magical and can use our charisma instead of their normal stat, and we can attack twice with the attack action. This is definitely our most combat-ready form, maybe call it the giant smoke monster Marceline turns into in the finale. We get one more spell from Warlock before we multiclass. I will say Ray of Enfeeblement, a ranged spell attack that doesn't deal damage, but cuts the target's damage from strength-based attacks in half. And our last Warlock ASI will bump Charisma and Wisdom up. Then we'll pick up Undying Servitude to get some undead minions. That'll let us cast Animate Dead once per day without using a spell slot. That's all I want from Warlock, so now let's hop over to the class that's best at transforming, Druid. We learn the secret Druid language, and more spells, yay! So for cantrips, Produce Flame makes a torch flame in our hand to help our friends see in the dark. Then we can throw the fire as an attack that deals up to 4d8 fire damage on a hit. And Primal Savagery is a bite attack with a little more oomph than our normal vampiric bite, dealing up to 4d10 acid damage on a hit. There aren't a lot of Druid spells I want, to be honest. Marceline strikes me more as a physical fighter for the most part, but we can grab Longstrider and Jump, along with Thunderwave, to play a riff on our base that blasts enemies back and deals thunder damage to them if they fail a Constitution save. Now we're mostly here for Wild Shape. Twice per rest, we can transform as an action into a beast with a challenge rating 1/4 or less, that does not have a swimming or flying speed. The classic example is a wolf, and luckily that fits the whole vampire thing pretty well. We replace our physical stats with the beasts, but we keep our mental stats and our saves and skill proficiencies. We can't cast spells, but we can use pretty much any of our other class features, and spells that were already cast stay active, so we can still benefit from, for example, our Form of Dread, our Mage Armor, Devil's Sight, Tasha's Otherworldly Guise, Mortal Husk, Death Ward, even Pact of the Blade if we turn into something that can use a weapon. We can stay transformed for a number of hours up to half of our Druid level, but we can turn back as a bonus action, or we automatically do if we're reduced to 0 HP. Along with Wild Shape, we join the Circle of Twilight, giving us Harvest Scythe. We get a pool of d10s equal to our Druid level that resets on our long rest. When we roll damage for a spell, we can roll any number of these dice up to half of our Druid level, and add that much necrotic damage to the spell's damage. If that kills the creature, we or an ally within 30 feet regains 2 HP per die spent, or 5 HP per die if the creature was undead, like, say, those vampires we hunted down. For second level spells, the main one I'm interested in is Enlarge Reduce, and more so for the Enlarge half. We can grow one side's category, giving us advantage on strength checks and saves, and we deal an extra d4 of damage with our weapon attacks. That's another one that carries over into Wild Shape, by the way. 4th level caps our Charisma with an ability score improvement, gives us the Guidance cantrip, raises the limit on our Wild Shape to CR 1/2 or lower, and removes the no swimming speed restriction. That doesn't do much for us now, but we will be using Wild Shape more later. 5th level druids get 3rd level spells, but there aren't actually any I care about, so we'll move on to 6th level for Speech Beyond the Grave from the Circle of Twilight. Once per rest, we can cast Speak with Dead without any components, and this lets us communicate with the corpse even if we don't share a language, or if they're not intelligent enough to talk at all. The last spell that I want to pick up is Guardian of Nature at 7th level. That'll turn us into a feral beast monster for up to a minute with our concentration. Our walking speed increases by 10 feet, our strength-based attacks have advantage, and our melee weapon attacks deal an extra 1d6 force damage on a hit. And once again, this one works with Wild Shape. It's almost like they designed a bunch of druid spells to work with the core druid mechanic. Weird. Our capstone is the 8th level of Druid. We'll bump Wisdom up to 16 with one last ASI, and our Wild Shape can now turn us into any beast with challenge rating 1 or less, including ones that can fly. That opens up the most important vampire transformation, the Bat, along with the Giant Bat from Marceline's standard monster form. I won't go through the whole stat block, but the Giant Bat has higher strength and dexterity than us, along with better AC if we have Mage Armor up, and has a 60-foot flying speed, plus whatever spells we have active while wild-shaped, like Enlarge Reduce or Tasha's Otherworldly Guise. Now that the build is complete, the question becomes, how good is it? Well, as is fitting for a 1,000-year-old vampire queen, we're pretty tough to kill. We have around 170 HP plus Wild Shape for more buffers, several methods of healing, and Death Ward and Mortal Husk to keep us alive even longer. We're also very mobile, with flying right from the get-go, along with wall walking and underwater capabilities as well. And the combination of Repelling Blast, Lance of Lethargy, and Form of Dread is powerful. With some decent rolls helped along by our capped Charisma modifier, we can push a creature back 40 feet, slow their movement speed by 10 feet, and frighten them so they can't move closer to us at all, while dealing 5d10 necrotic damage to them, plus whatever extra damage we can pile on from things like Hex and Harvest Scythe. On the other hand, other than Charisma and Wisdom, we're kinda lacking a bit when it comes to our ability scores. Our physical stats and strength especially fell by the wayside a bit, since we can replace them with our Wild Shape. And speaking of, we aren't Circle of the Moon, so our Wild Shape is not great for combat. It uses up our action to transform, we can't turn into anything higher than CR1, we can't use our spells while changed, and we only get 2 uses per rest. It's really more of a scouting tool than anything else, and our base form has just as much mobility. And finally, I hate to keep harping on Wild Shape, but it takes way too long to get the forms we want. Really, all I wanted from it was the bat and the giant bat, but since they fly, we have to take a whole 8 levels of druid that otherwise don't do a whole lot for us. Without that restriction, we could have made do with 2 druid levels.
Oh, Marceline, why are you so mean?
I'm not mean, I'm 1,000 years old, and I just lost track of my moral code.
Oh, Marceline, can't you see these guys are in pain?
No, I can't. I'm invested in this very cute video game.
So there go our boys.
I hope you enjoyed the build. If you have any feedback or suggestions for characters you'd like to see me build, please leave them in the comments below. Leave a like or subscribe if you want to see more, and if you want to support what I'm doing here, you can check the description for the link to my Patreon, for access to the Discord channel, early access to future builds, and exclusive Patreon content. Thank you for watching, friends. I will see y'all later.